So sometimes finding materials, especially bullets for 8x57 or any of the 323 diameter cartridges is pretty difficult to find. It's not a common bullet for North America, and they're hard to find. And when you do find them, they tend to be quite expensive. So sometimes you might have to search out alternate sources for your bullets. And one of the sources that you can use are cast bullets. If you can find them, you can cast them yourself, of course. But you do have a velocity cap when it comes to cast bullets. So there is an alternative. A bunch of ammunition, it's actually machine gun ammunition, came into Canada quite recently from a company called Mauser. They imported a bunch of Swedish machine gun ammunition. It's called 8x63. Now, of course, you can't use 8x63 in your Mauser rifle, not without reaming the chamber with a special reaming die. And also, if you can find that die, it permanently alters your rifle, and you have to do some magazine changes to make the cartridge work. So what a lot of people are doing is they're actually pulling the bullets and reusing the components. So that means the powder and the bullet. The bullet is a full metal jacket bullet, and it's about 214 grains plus or minus. So overall, it's actually a pretty good deal from Mauser. You can buy yourself a crate, which comes in a metal case, and it comes with 7 belts of 250 rounds each. So that's a total of 1,750 rounds, and all of that for $280. And on top of that, you can return the belts. You can sell them back to Mauser for an in-store credit, and each belt they'll give you $15 for. So that's actually not so bad. The shipping is pretty crazy depending on where you live, and that can drive the cost up quite a bit. But you get, 1,750 bullets, you get quite a few pounds of powder, and then you also get the brass, which you could take to a scrap dealer, and because it is brass, and then get some money back from that. So it is kind of a reloader's dream. It's a salvager's dream. But wait, Tootanom, are you suggesting we should use a foreign Swedish powder from a machine gun in our beautiful K98K Mausers? Unknown powder, isn't that nuts? Well, it is kind of nuts. It is a little crazy, and yeah, there is a little bit of danger involved with this. But I'm going to coach you through it, and we'll try to make it as safe as possible. I'm not the only one who's tried this. I researched a lot on Canadian gun nuts, and if you're a Canuck and you're a shooter, I highly recommend that you go on to Canadian gun nuts and you make yourself an account, because it really is the best place to get information for all kinds of weird stuff. And it's got a great exchange space where you can buy and sell firearms and all kinds of stuff. But yeah, I'm not the only one to do this, and it is possible, and I have done it, and it works. Now, if you're just interested in reclaiming the bullets, it's still a good deal, and you could just dump your powder. Apparently, it's got lots of nitrates in it, and it's good for grass. I don't know. I've never actually tried this myself, but you could just dump the powder and then be done with it. And maybe you could still scrap the brass and get some cash back for that. And, of course, the belts. The belts are still returnable, so you could skip this part. If you don't want to experiment with powder, you can skip the rest of this video, and then that will be fine. So the first thing that you have to do is get yourself a good chunk of 3/8 or 5/16 or 1/4 inch plate, maybe about 6 inches long, and drill yourself a 5/16 inch hole in it. Now you may have to use a pilot hole to build up to that 5/16. Pretty much a standard hole drilling procedure. And I'd recommend using a steel plate. I've got a piece of aluminum here, and what I found out is after several hundred rounds, the hole starts to widen up. I didn't expect that to happen. So you make yourself your plate, and then you basically just stick it in something solid like a vise. So the first thing you want to do is you want to stick up your cartridge into the hole, and then give it a good tweak in all 4 directions, right on the bullet. And that'll loosen the bullet up so that you can pull it out with your fingertips. There you go. It's pretty much that simple. Then you can dump your powder out. So that's why I used a 5/16 diameter hole. I wanted the hole to be large enough so I could stick the bullet in and not worry about the neck getting in the way. You do that over and over and over and over again, it could get a little tedious. You could do a 250 round belt in about an hour using this method. So you're still here. So I'm going to take that as proof that you're interested in using this powder in your cartridges. So you're probably asking, why is this safe? Well, if you look back on the history of this cartridge, the Swedes were interested in developing a machine gun that had more power than a 6.5 by 55, which was their current service cartridge. And they wanted more range and they wanted more power. And they wanted to use the Browning Model 1917 as the basis of their new general purpose machine gun. So that's what they used, and they developed this 8x63 cartridge because the 8mm was more of a standard diameter bullet for European countries, and they developed a 30-06 version. So really, this cartridge, it fires a 218 grain bullet. Well, it's supposed to be 218 grains. As we'll see later, it's more like 214. And it pushes that out for at about 2,500 feet per second. So we're not really talking about a high-powered cartridge here. I mean, it's pretty potent, but it's not a super high pressure. It's basically a 30-06 necked up to an 8mm bullet. So in a lot of ways, it's like an 8mm 06 or a 35 Whelen or something kind of like that. So we're within the realms of possibility here. It's not a super high intensity cartridge. Not only that, but the Swedes did actually equip some of their machine gun crews with a bolt action rifle. It was a Model 98 Mauser that was rechambered with a new barrel, big ass muzzle brake on the front, and it was chambered in 8x63. They had to do some magazine changes to make sure that the cartridge would actually fit into the rifle, into the magazine. But other than that, they really didn't do much to the rifle. And eventually, when they decided to ditch the cartridge, they sold off all of these rifles off to the Israelis, and they became Israeli Mausers. So it's not like the cartridge damaged them in any way. So that's a good place to start. I mean, the cartridge isn't like some super duper overpowered rocket coming out. It's actually quite moderate. So the powder itself should also be quite moderate. The 8x63 is a larger cartridge than the 8x57. So we're going to have to figure out how much powder is in the 8x63. And we're also going to have to figure out what the volume difference is between the 8x63 and the 8x57. Now the trick here for using this type of powder from a larger cartridge and sticking it into a smaller cartridge is to figure out the powder versus volume ratio. As you can see here, I'm weighing the powder charge from about 4 or 5 cases and seeing how much powder is actually in the 8x63. And it looks like it's running about 54.5 grains of powder. The next step is to figure out the volume of the 8x63 and the volume of the 8x57 cartridge. Now I'm using an unfired 8x63 case because, well, I can't really fire these things off. I don't have a rifle to do that in. So I'm using an unfired 8x57 cartridge as an example of an 8x57. The 8x63 has a primer in it, so that's no problem. But the 8x57 doesn't. So I've cut out a piece of electrical tape and I've put it on the bottom so the water doesn't leak out. And we're going to use water to figure out the volume here. And we're going to weigh it. Now what you can do is you can put an 8x63 case on your scale and then start it. And what that will do is it will zero the scale. So it'll take into account the weight of the case. Then you take an eyedropper or a syringe or something like that, and then you fill the case up with water until it reaches the case mouth, the very top. And just be careful, if you got a little spill, you can pull the case off and then use a piece of tissue paper and then sop up the extra water, dry everything out, and try again. Now, you may have to watch out for air bubbles within the case. That's happened to me where I've got a big bubble entrapped within the case and then I get a weird reading. So do it a few times. Make sure that you've got a pretty consistent value for both your 8x63 and your 8x57. Okay, so now that we have some numbers to work with, we can start crunching. So we know the weight of the powder that's in the 8x63 case. That's about 54.5 grains. And we know from the weight of the water that we put in the 8x63 and the 8x57 case what their relative volumes are. That being 8x63 has a water weight of about 72 grains and the 8x57 has a water weight of about 60 grains. So let's get our ratio first. Now if you divide 60 by 72, you come up with a ratio of approximately 0.83. So the 8x57 is about 0.83 or 83% of the 8x63. So that's a good number to know. Now you take that number, 0.83, and you multiply it by the grains of powder in the 8x63 being 54.5. And you come out with a number that's 45 grains. Now that is your proposed limit for your reloading. So basically the volume of powder in the 8x57 case, if you use 45 grains, will be approximately the same as the volume of powder in the 8x63 case at 54.5 grains. I know, it's a lot of numbers, but that's your kind of proposed limit. Now, if you follow the reloaders, their kind of method, you don't start at 45 grains, you start at 10% less. So you take your 45 grains and you multiply it by 90% or 0.9 and you come out with 40.5 grains. That's your starting point. That's your minimum load. So I loaded cartridges running from 41 grains all the way to 46. Now, another note of warning here is that you don't want to compress this powder. I would not recommend compressing this powder. You just don't know how it's going to react under compression. So if you're loading up and for some reason or another your rifle can only take short cartridges and then you get up to about 44 grains and you start compressing the powder, stop there, because it's a bit of a risk and you just don't know how it's going to react. So after I loaded all this stuff up, I packed up all my gear and I headed to the range and took all my kit with me. Now before we go any farther, I'm telling you, don't trust my numbers. Check them yourself. Get out your calculator and do the measurements and do the weighing and do all that stuff yourself before you load up your cases. Don't trust me. Don't trust me. Just do it, okay? Don't trust my numbers. Do it yourself. You gotta know that it's done right. So the first time around, I'd recommend you set your rifle up on some sandbags, cover it up really well, and then fire it remotely with a string. Because you just don't know for sure, right? And let the guys around you know what you're up to. They may want to get out of the way. Because it is a little creepy the first time you shoot this off. You just don't know what's going to happen. So after I took the first shot, I had a really good look at the brass. The bolt was easy to open, and the brass was fine. There was no signs of pressure or any irregularities with the brass, no split necks, none of that stuff. So I decided to continue. Now the first group of 41 grains loading averaged about 1,760 feet per second, so pretty low in velocity, but the standard deviation was about 133 feet, so not great. Try it up to 42 grains. That was 1,854 feet per second, with a standard deviation of 129. 43 grains was 1,937 feet per second, with a standard deviation of 144. You know, it was kind of all over the paper at this point. And then, for some reason or another, right at 44 grains, the 44 grain loading, it tightened up. I got a velocity of about 2,100 feet per second, and the standard deviation shrunk down to 55. So that was a pretty decent loading. Then at 45 grains, I don't know what the heck happened. The velocity dropped down to 1,866 with a standard deviation of 129. So that was weird. That was not what I was expecting to see. Some weird oddball thing there. I don't know. But there were no pressure signs that I can tell. The primer's starting to flatten out a little bit at 45, but nothing too serious. I wasn't too worried about it. So I went up to my last loading, which was 46, and that got up to a velocity of 2,190 feet per second, and it had the lowest standard deviation of 44, and it had the tightest group. I got a good solid 3 inches out of this group, where the rest of them, I was looking at anywhere from 4 all the way to like 6 or 7 inches. So not so great. This rifle isn't particularly accurate. I think it needs a bedding job. The barrel's pretty decent, and 3 inches is as good as you're going to get out of this particular rifle. Maybe if I do some work to it, it'll shrink it down. But 46 grains. Yeah, almost going up to 2,200 feet per second, and a good tight standard deviation. So I figure I could probably stick another grain of powder into this and not have any worries about pressure. But anything more than that, and I'm going to be looking at compressing the powder, which is, well, I don't want to do that. So at the most, I might go up to 47 grains, but the 46 grains seem to work out. So are there other applications for this powder? I would say yes. You're going to end up with a bunch of extra powder. Even if you shoot off all of the bullets, you're going to end up with some surplus there to use on something else. And I think you could. This particular powder is probably somewhere in between IMR 4064 and H380 in burn rate. So take that as you may. I mean, you could probably use this powder in all kinds of, medium weight military cartridges, 30-06, 303 Brits, the 7x57, the list goes on and on that you could use it in. I think it's pretty safe to use it in all those cartridges, though you will have to go through the process again. You're going to have to measure the volume of the case and then go through the calculations and go from there. And you can use, your normal loading manuals to look, what is H380? What are the velocities coming out of that? What is the loads that they're recommending? What is IMR 4064 for this cartridge? What are the loads that they're using? And you can extrapolate from that and come out with a safe loading for your rifle. So there you are, folks. That's how you download 8x63 ammunition, so bullet and powder, into an 8x57. And it works. So that's all I got for you today, guys. Hope you had a good one. Hope you had this video worked for you. Have a good one, and I'll see you out on the range.